Last one. I hope you're all sticking with me. We're almost done. Okay? This is honestly probably the most believable. If I wasn't a Christian, this is the one that I would go for. But even it falls apart so easily. And this is the idea that either Jesus never existed at all. At that point, you are ignoring all the historical quotes and stuff that I gave you earlier. And many, many more that I didn't put in here because I didn't want you all to fall asleep on me. So to say he doesn't exist at all. Or that Jesus there was a real historical Jesus. He ticked off the powerful people, and the powerful people killed him like they did to Socrates and to other famous people in history who, when you take on the powerful, what do people in power fear? Losing power, and so they kill you. So their power is not threatened anymore. And that Jesus is just that. And as the story of Jesus gets passed around like the ultimate game of telephone, the story just gets bigger and bigger and more exaggerated. Like when Grandpa tells you the story of when he caught a fish this big, and then 30 years later he's telling the grandkids he's catching a shark, right? And that's what happened with Jesus. Problem with that, Jesus' own followers, first of all, Peter hits his head on. He says, look, we did not invent these cleverly devised myths when we made known to you the coming of our Lord Jesus, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. John says, look, that which was from the beginning, Jesus, we heard him, we touched him, we saw him alive, we saw him resurrected. We weren't just making something up, we interacted with him physically. Again, problems. To say that Jesus never existed ignores all the historical evidence that exists out there. Secular and Christian alike, in the decades and the centuries that followed the resurrection. At that point, how do you prove anything? If you dismiss the historical evidence and say Jesus never existed, at that point, you can't even prove Muhammad was real. You can't prove that Buddha was real. You can't even prove that Julius Caesar was real at that point. How do you prove anyone existed? In 1,000 years, how will we prove you exist? You think there'll be some Facebook around that'll still have your profile on it? There's more evidence that Jesus existed than almost any other person in history. And to dismiss that is to dismiss every other historical person. None of you questioned that Alexander the Great was real, or that Julius Caesar was real, or that Muhammad was real, or that Dalai Lama was real. And yet you want to do that for Jesus? Why? Yet again, okay, even if Jesus was just a normal guy and the story about him got bigger and exaggerated as the decades go on, why did all of Jesus' friends and enemies still say the body was missing? Oh, the resurrection got added on a century or two later. No, it didn't. It was there from the beginning. All the creeds, all the writings, both religious and secular, talk about him rising from the grave. From the beginning. And lastly, look, we have no one who denies that Jesus did miracles. We have no one who denies the empty grave, okay? We have different explanations. He was demon-possessed. The disciples came and stole the body. We have different explanations, but we don't have different facts. He taught, he lived, he did miracles, he died. His body was missing 3 days later. Different explanations, but the same facts. And as far as the exaggeration thing goes, John is the last gospel written, almost 60 years after the account, 30 years after the first three, roughly. So if any of them is going to be exaggerated, then John should be the most exaggerated of all the New Testament writing. And yet it's not. It has high Christology, absolutely. But it's not more exaggerated than the other three. In fact, in many ways, it's actually more conservative. There's only 7 miracles in John. You can go to almost any page in Matthew, you'll find 7 miracles on one page. There's no Mount of Transfiguration where Jesus gets shiny. There's not one verse in John where Jesus cast out a demon. It's demon-free almost in John. So all of the sensational is actually in the synoptics. John, in many ways, is actually far more conservative by comparison. And yet he's last and he's supposed to be the most exaggerated? When that's not the case whatsoever.